So what is a wood engraving? That's a good question. Wood engraving is often known as the art of the white line because it's when you have a block and you carve into it, everywhere where you carve into the material, you create a white line. So it is essentially white line drawing. If you want a black line, you have to carve two white lines. So this is an impression off of this block. So to get those black lines that you saw there, everywhere around it had to be carved away. Wood engraving is different from woodcut in that it's done on the end grain of the wood. If you make a mistake, it's garbage. You essentially have to start over. You can try to fill in those scratches and that, but that's a very difficult process. The wood engraving is done on the end grain or the butt end of a piece of wood, and the reason is because then you don't get splinters. You can go in any direction you want, and you don't have to worry about the wood splintering up. And usually how it's done is the blocks are made by taking multiple blocks out of the piece of wood and then gluing them together. And they're usually very, very small. They're not very big. By the 1850s, they could engrave photographs on the end grain of wood. And people are often surprised to find that the term engraving was often confused with intaglio processes that were very popular earlier on. But wood engraving, what made possible newspapers like the London Illustrated News and Punch magazine, because at that point, when they developed the technique to this level, it meant that they could start putting products into newspapers and print it at the same time as they're printing type. So this revolutionized the printing industry, and we see a lot of ads like this. And if you look closely at this, you can actually see the white lines. This image is made entirely white lines. So what made the background is something called a multiple line tool, and it just goes one way, scores multiple lines all at the same time, and then they take it the next way, and that's how they would create a continuous tone image. And a good engraver could look at a photograph and say, oh, that's a number 80 line, that's a number 130 line, and they could use the tools and reproduce any photograph. It's different from woodcut and linocut, which many people practice in high school. Cutting a woodcut usually produces a cruder image. And I'm not talking about the woodcuts of Albert Dürer, who used a very hard wood, and he only used one tool, he used a knife. But the woodcuts, like the German expressionists made, were mostly cruder because of the type of tools they were using and the softness of the wood. So soft woods usually give you a rougher look. And also you can tell a woodcut because it usually leaves evidence of the grain of the wood behind, as you can see that in the imagery. Linocut became very popular because linoleum, battleship linoleum, became very accessible. An accessible material, it's essentially flooring. So if your floor is coming up, you can still carve a picture of the floor and make an impression from it. And many of you would be familiar with lino from high school, where you get a chance to actually carve into this. And there's a typical tool, a lino tool. They're usually orange handled and very reliable. Now, this is an article I did for Wood Carving Illustrated magazine, and it goes step by step on how to create a wood engraving. So I thought I'd just throw this in the slides so you can actually see it. These are the tools that I used. I also used a Dremel, one of those power tools, on the wood to remove some of the white areas. So first I create a drawing, then I transfer it to the block, I reinforce the image with a pencil, and then I outline the image with a pen. So I inking it, and that's so that when I'm carving it, the sweat from my hands doesn't blur the image. And then once I've got inked in, then I start to carve it. So there I'm using the top as a Dremel, and here you can see I'm using the hand tools to pull up the details. And here's how you can simply print it by hand. Roll ink over top of the surface, put the paper over top, and the simplest way to get an impression off is use a wooden spoon and just rub. You can use any kind of spoon, any burnisher at all. You can just rub the surface and you get an impression. What art. So all that technique is in my book, The Woodcut Artist Handbook, where I've put down everything I could possibly think about that has to do with related techniques to woodcut and wood engraving. And there's Ralph Steadman. Ralph Steadman gave me a piece. That's one of his early woodcuts. He told me that wood is so beautiful, why would anyone think of cutting it? You just take the block, ink it up, and print it. And he did a whole series in the 60s of woodcuts. You know, everyone's familiar with Ralph Steadman and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and that scratchy ink style where the ink is flying all over the place. And yet he is a printmaker, he still does prints, and he has a studio where he's still doing screen prints and intaglios. And then here there are some other, Naoko Matsubara, the Canadian woodcut artist. And then down here are some historical images. A lot of people don't realize it, but all of Alice in Wonderland, the 1896 edition, were printed from wood engravings. These wood engravings were created by the DeZiel company, whose expertise was to take any ink drawing and make it into a wood engraving. So the artist would come in this case John Kenyon would come in and hand over the artwork, and the engravers would engrave it all on wood. Another interesting thing is the blocks were never printed. Never printed from the blocks. Why? Because they created stereotypes. That's where the word comes from. In France, they call them cliches, but in North American England, they call them stereotypes. They actually took casts from the blocks and then poured metal into those castings, mounted those on the plates, and then